You're listening to Table Talks for Life, a Y4Life podcast that prepares youth to be gospel-motivated voices for life. Be sure to stick around after today's live recording to find out how you can be engaged in upholding life too. Welcome to today's Table Talk for Life. We are doing our What's on the Table Part 2 this week. And we have some really great articles that we're going to talk about, or maybe issues we're going to talk about. So welcome to the podcast. We're so glad you're here. My name is Michelle Bauman, and I am the director of Y4Life. With me today, there are 4 others. I'm going to go ahead and give them the opportunity to introduce themselves.
I'm Corey Meyer. I am the Y4Life assistant.
I'm Olivia Hitz, and I'm one of the co-presidents of CUC for Life, the chapter of Y4Life at Concordia University, Chicago.
I'm Bonnie Poole. I'm the Y4Life Media Resource Assistant.
And I'm Kate. I'm the Y4Life intern.
Thank you. All right, welcome. So we're going to jump right into our first article, which is in the news, and Kate brought this to our attention. So I'm going to hand it over to her, and she's going to tell us all about it.
Yes, so we're starting with our article. It is from The Hill. It is called "The Teen Mental Health Crisis Also Afflicts Parents." So in this article, they were talking about how research has found that nearly equal levels of anxiety and depression among teenagers and their parents. 18% of teens reported anxiety, along with 20% of mothers and 15% of fathers. They found 15% of teens reported depression, joined by 16% of moms and 10% of dads. By 2021, 42% of high school students and nearly 60% of high school girls reported chronic sadness or hopelessness. Nearly 1/4 of girls said that they had made a suicide plan. The good news in this is that this was a Harvard study done, and they are actually finding that anxiety and depression is decreasing in teens, and they are finding lower numbers than what is being reported by the CDC. So that is great to hear. But while I was just thinking through this article and thinking about how mental health is a life issue, but it also impacts so many other life issues like suicide, abortion, marriage, family, homelessness, foster care, elderly, end-of-life issues. You could keep on going. But one that really came to mind that has been talked about so prevalently recently is human trafficking, because of the new Sound of Freedom movie that has come out. So I have not had an opportunity to see this movie yet, but Olivia has. So I think that she is going to share a little bit with us about what the movie is about.
Yeah, I went and saw it earlier last week, and it was wonderful. It was a great movie. Everyone who I've talked to in person, like you said, has said nothing but wonderful things about it. It's rated PG-13. Like Kate said, it's Sound of Freedom. It's based on a true story, actually, which I think is really great. And it, I found myself throughout the movie having to remind myself of that as well, because it's just, there's so much cruelty going on in the world and everything. And this movie really clearly displays that, not in a graphic way or in an explicit way. Like they don't show anything necessarily explicit on screen, but you know what's going on. You know exactly what's going on. So the story follows our main character, Tim Ballard. He is a former government agent who worked in the Homeland Security Department until he resigned so that he could work to rescue children from a huge sex trafficking cartel in Colombia. So he was at first working with Homeland Security to catch a bunch of pedophiles and people who were helping sex trafficking, but then he kind of had this realization moment, which was a really great thing to see. He was talking to another one of his coworkers, and I'm not going to try to spoil too much of it, but I thought this was an important part. And he kind of was asking, like, how many pedophiles have we caught? And it was like some great big number. And he was like, yeah, we've caught this many. And then he was like, but how many children have we rescued? And they kind of went silent. And so he kind of had this realization moment that he needed to work to help rescue the children who were being trafficked. And I think that also was a moment that kind of ties into our topic of mental health, because he had this moment where he goes and talks to his boss, and he's like, I can't do this. I need to go I need to go rescue some kids. Like, this is doing a really big load on my mental health. And, I don't know exactly how he said it, but that was kind of the gist, where he was saying, like, this job takes a lot out of you. and I need to piece myself back together. So yeah, the movie, definitely recommend it. I think it's going to be in theaters for another few weeks, is what the estimate was. But yeah, if you get a chance to watch it, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I've heard really good things. And obviously, human trafficking is a bigger issue than what we maybe realize, right? There's more people being enslaved and trafficked today than any other time when slavery was legal. When it was legalized. So, and it's often done undercover, right in front of us, right? So the people, the young people in particular that are most susceptible to human trafficking are those that are lonely, are those that maybe don't have two parents watching over them and protecting them, right? That maybe don't have the social systems or the community that's watching out for them. But they are very often the kids that are high risk because of lack of interaction or because of mental health issues. So I know, Kate, you've got some questions for us to kind of think about in reference to this. And so I'm going to hand it back over to you. And maybe we can look through those things.
Yeah, so while we're still talking about Sound of Freedom, I thought we'd talk about how we can respond to the controversy surrounding the movie. I mean, we have all heard great things. We just heard from Olivia what it was about, and it sounds incredible. But the media is telling a completely different story about this film. I was just reading a Rolling Stone article titled "Sound of Freedom is a superhero movie for dads with brain worms." This thriller about child trafficking is designed to appeal to the conscience of a conspiracy-addled boomer. How do we respond to that as For Life voices, and
Wow.
why is it important to talk about human trafficking?
Yeah. I mean, my first thought on that is, I mean, like Michelle said, like obviously, we've heard so many times that we are in the age with the most slavery in history, and it's kind of hard to think about that because something that I heard, I think I read another article probably similar to the one you were talking about, where someone was asking themselves like, why now are we having more slavery when it is technically illegal? I mean, it is very much illegal to enslave anyone, and to especially to like sex trafficking and all this sort of stuff, and it's all illegal. And so we can't make a step like we were able to end slavery during the Civil War. Like we can't have a war about it. We can't change a law. The laws already say that sex trafficking is illegal. And so something I think that part of the controversy is over is that kind of idea where we all just feel very helpless against this situation. And I think a lot of people, when they watch that, they feel, it's uncomfortable to watch. It's very uncomfortable. And I think we feel like, of course, we're against this, but it's hard to, because no one's going to come out and say that they're pro sex trafficking. No one's going to come out and say that. And the only people that you hear saying that are those who run the cartels and those who are consumers of that industry. And so, but they're not going to come out and say that. So where is this controversy coming from? I mean, the standard American that would have written that article or is thinking that, like, I doubt that they would say that they're in support of sex trafficking. So I do think that's a very interesting question. And I guess, I mean, the biggest thing that I can see is just the uncomfortableness of having to discuss it and having so few options of how to respond.
I think it's important to remember too, is sex trafficking is directly related to the pornography industry. And we know that the pornography industry makes more money than National Football League, right? than sports industries. We know that just on our fact sheet, even people can look that up. Men and women are involved. We have 70% of women between the ages of, I think it's 18 and 35 have seen pornography at least once in the last month, right? And we know that the same thing is happening with men. It's actually at a little bit lower percent with men, according to the most recent statistics. So if we recognize there's this tie to pornography, which is a big money-making business, certainly there's going to be a push, whether it's obvious from that industry, but there's going to be some pushback on a film that's so openly discusses the issue of human trafficking and how horrific it is for people of all ages, but in particular children, who are the most vulnerable among us. I mean, Satan is certainly at work in the world, right? And many life issues address those that are most vulnerable, and this is one of them. And so we should expect pushback from something that is meant to be life affirming, if it's going to impede on money. I hate to say it, but on a money making industry. So
I think the other thing that has led to controversy with it, and I haven't seen the movie yet, and I would love to go see it now that I know more about it. We've talked a lot in our circles today about toxic masculinity and what toxicity actually looks like. So I think people are looking at this and saying, oh, it's just another toxic male who thinks he needs to go save the world, where that's not the case at all. He's seeing the problem and he wants to do something about it. But I think those people who have taken this idea of toxic masculinity to a whole new level are seeing it as something that it's not. And they're trying to, like that headline that you brought up, Kate, they're trying to label this as more of a problem than trying to find a solution to the actual problem of trafficking. And so I think that's part of the big controversy too, is when we've put so much emphasis on toxicity that we can't even look at the actual toxic problems. We have to just look at the perceived toxicity of someone who may want to end the problem.
I totally agree, Corey. I think that a lot of stuff is, and again, I have also not seen the movie, but I think that storyline is kind of being read into the plot instead of exactly seeing it for what it is, which is trying to raise concerns about a big problem, and automatically kind of seeing the male hero as a villain because he's a male hero, when in reality that's a beautiful thing, that man or woman, somebody would bravely stand up to an evil in the world, and that's something that we should be able to honor and celebrate, regardless of the gender of the hero. So I totally agree. I think that's kind of the other piece of the controversy, is sort of that negativity towards male leadership.
So again, our Y4Life response, I think, is to speak the truth in love, right? To continue to uphold the male role in the movie, to point out that trafficking is happening, that pornography business is big, and to just continue to confess the truth, that we, not only that every life is valuable, right, but that we are called to speak for the voiceless, for the weak. We are called to defend, and even not just biblically. I mean, very clearly there's a biblical mandate for that, but we would even say that our government, the laws that are created, and the reason we have that law, the reason human trafficking isn't legal is because we recognize that people need to be protected. The weak need to be protected. So even our government recognizes that necessity through the laws that have been passed. So,
as far as how we respond to this, one thing that I've seen is that I'm not sure of the source, but somebody has donated, whether it's an organization or many people, like bought a whole bunch of tickets to the movie so that you can go and get a free ticket, which I think is one really awesome way to just say, hey, like, this is literally at no cost to you. Why wouldn't you go and kind of learn more about this? Even if you kind of have a negative attitude towards it, maybe you're maybe prejudiced more against to thinking it's not a good movie. Why not just go see it for yourself? That kind of thing. I think that's a really awesome thing, where people aren't just responding in hate back. They're like, well, let me show you. Like, I'll buy the ticket for you, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a really great thing about this movie, and I think then it's produced by Angel Studios, in case we hadn't mentioned that. But And I think it's also really great that that's kind of been the response after this movie took so long to be released, because I'm sure a lot of you have seen in the news as well. It's talked about that this movie, it took 4 or 5 years. I think it was like shot like 5 years ago, and it's just taken this long to release it because of the pushback. And I think another company even bought the rights to the movie just so that it couldn't be released. Like, so there was a lot of hatefulness in the movie industry about this, and just so much pushback about it. And so it's wonderful to see the flip side of that now that it's finally out, people being like, yes, now that it's out, we need to make sure that everyone gets a chance to see this movie.
Well, I think we could probably talk for like the next 2 hours just about human trafficking. But I guess we can circle back to just the topic of mental health in general. And I wanted to pose the question, do we think that mental health affects our vocations?
I think absolutely. And I think that what you brought up in the articles, that the original article about parenting and like parents of children with mental health problems having a higher rate of mental health issues, that's a big thing, and something that I now experience as a parent myself. Just like, jobs are taxing, and whether or not that's your occupation where you go for your 9 to 5, or just like the different vocations that you have. So being a mother or a father is a really, really hard thing. And it definitely stretches you in lots of different ways. And I only have a 1-year-old, so I know it only gets harder somehow. But just that, yeah. And when your mental health suffers, you aren't able to be there as present. You aren't able to be as present for your kids, or for your employees, or for your customers, whatever the case is. And so I would say it's not surprising that parents who have children with mental health problems also tend to suffer from them. And what that may be that there's a genetic component, and so it could be the parent passing it to the child, or in some cases a child having an issue, and that causes a lot of concern and stress for the parent as well. But I would say absolutely mental health affects whatever vocation, because mental health is a part of every single person's full health. And so when that suffers, other parts of your life are going to suffer too.
I think you're totally right on that, Bonnie. I think that like everything you said, that was just so well put. And one of the biggest aspects that I see in a lot of other vocations, obviously I'm not a mother, but I do have a lot of other vocations in my life. And something that I've seen, whether it be with my friends or family or whatever, is that shame comes into it a lot as well. And like you said, mental health is a very big aspect of your overall health, but a lot of people have a lot of trouble seeing that. And so they tend to feel a lot of shame surrounding any sort of mental health issues. And so when you feel that shame from your whatever state your mental health is in, that carries over into every aspect of your life. Suddenly you feel shame in not being able to show up to your job every day, or be able to complete your full shift, or work as hard as you think you should be able to. And so I think that shame, it's really a product of what the devil whispers in your ear, and he tells you like, you're not good enough, you are, you're not a very good worker, you're not fulfilling your vocations. And that, I think, is such a big aspect to it as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There is that shame component. And of course, we as gospel motivated people have an answer to that, right? We as Christians, that our value is not determined based on our abilities or our mental health, right? It's not based on our looks or our actions. It is based on God's word and what God has done in our lives in creating, redeeming, and calling us. We are valuable because of that. And I think, you're absolutely right. Both of you, just as far as the fact that it affects our lives. And that makes sense too, when we recognize that as people, we are woven together, right? Psalm 139 says that he knit me together in my mother's womb. And so we are not just physical beings, but we are also mental and emotional beings. We have so many layers that have been woven together. And so when we have mental health crisis, it's going to affect us in other areas of our life. It might manifest itself physically. Like you think about when you experience great worry, right? Maybe over a test or something to come, do you ever get a stomach ache, right? Or when your arm is broken or your foot is broken and you can't participate in things with friends, do you ever get sad, right? And can that sadness grow into a loneliness and a depression or anxiety? So again, our bodies are so woven together by God's beautiful arrangement that we also recognize mental health can affect not just our vocations, but also our very bodies. So to address that shame too, it's okay to recognize when we're sick, right? When we're not just sick physically, but when we're sick mentally, and to reach out for help, whether that's through pastoral counseling or medical assistance, through medicine. Those things are God's gifts to us, through friends, through counseling sessions. There's lots of things that we can do to feed our mental health in a positive way.
Yeah, and I think too, Michelle, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Word of Hope. They're always there to call if you have any mental health issues. I know that they're more than willing to talk you through those things, and that, if maybe you can't find a Christian counselor right away and you just need someone to talk to quick, because I know therapy offices have very long waiting lists right now too. So definitely want to make sure that if you need someone to talk to now, there are people who want to talk to you. So I do have the Word of Hope number pulled up if we want to drop that into. It's 888-217-8679. So yeah, just, I know that the ladies there are very willing to talk to and help through any mental health crises that may come up.
So one of the ways you can remember that number, 888-21-STORY. So that's another way you can remember that number. So yeah, excellent. Thanks for bringing that in. Other questions you have, Kate? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so as we see in the article, both our friends and our family statistically might be struggling with mental health issues. So how can we support them in that? And what do we do when our mental health is struggling? Because we have others who are really needing to lean on us because their mental health is down. Like if you have a parent who is dealing with depression, how do you protect your own mental health during a time like that?
So I'm going to give a few tips and tricks, but I'd love for you guys to jump in if you have things to add. One, turn off the TV and turn off the news. A lot of what we are exposed to is not good for our mental health, right? Step away from social media, because what sells is the controversial stuff, right? So if you're already filled with anxiety about things or depressed, putting more into our minds that creates anxiety or worry or sadness is not a healthy move. So, and that's just a basic counselor technique. Let's step away from those things. But I think it's also important to remember to feed those things which are healthy, right? So to spend more time in God's word, to spend more time in prayer, to spend more time with the people who God has placed in our lives to uphold us, right? Whether those are friends or family members, whether it's pastoral care, our pastors, or trusted adults, teachers. I think it's important to speak, to share with others that you're struggling or that you sense that the struggle is coming, right? Just, saying something as simple as, just, I feel like I'm on the precipice of something's not so good, right? Or I've been really sad lately, and I need you to know to help me monitor my health and to make healthy decisions. Partnering up with people is a good idea. Now, I don't want to take them all, so jump in.
Yeah, Michelle, you mentioned earlier that mental health and physical health are so intertwined. We're so knit together in those ways. So I was thinking of like physical activity, finding ways to be active, because that has such an impact. And they've done research on like the connection between, your brain activity when you're doing physical activity, and you may not feel great physically in the moment, but when it's all said and done, if you're just going for a walk or maybe you're doing a full workout, whatever physical activity makes you feel great physically will also help boost some of those happy hormones and things in your brain.
Endorphins.
Yes, endorphins. Thank you. It will help boost those things in your brain so that you maybe have a little bit more pep in your step, and you can better sit with someone or invite someone to go on that walk with you. Get outside and be in nature together. That always helps. And the other thing that I thought of too is just like, it's so hard when you're in a mental health struggle to think of things that you're thankful for, but like gratitude journaling, or like putting together pictures of happy times, things like that always spark those memories in your head, and again generate some of those happy feelings for you. And like I said, it might be hard to gratitude journal in the moment, but even thinking of one thing, like, okay, yeah, it might be a struggle to clean the house, but you have a house to clean, so maybe that's something to be grateful for.
I think
Absolutely.
one thing that I was thinking of is sort of the idea of reframing. And so it's not so much, sure, you have to clean your house, but you also, you have the opportunity to serve your family by cleaning up. And along with that, one thing that I find helpful is if I am really overwhelmed by like housework or whatever it is, I just actually, if I'm overwhelmed by anything, I'm just usually any mess in my house is like a compounding factor. So I just take 10 minutes to tidy my house, or go take a shower, or make sure I've brushed my teeth for the day, things like that. Like personal hygiene, I think just little whatever you can do, I think does a lot to like just lift your spirits in a way and kind of help you take a second and kind of refocus. The other thing that I wanted to mention, because we have this wonderful opportunity as Lutherans, I think, when we talk about mental health, is the idea of the sacraments being available to us. And I should hat tip to my sister-in-law, Emily Ann Wirt. She's actually a deaconess up in Grand Rapids, and we were just talking about this. She wrote an article for Higher Things a number of years back. So I don't know if we want to link that in the description, but she talks all about this, how the sacraments are to be used, or are useful for people, well, for all people, but along with that, people who are struggling with mental health problems. So baptism reminds you of your identity. If your anxiety or depression is causing you to question who you are, you can always remember your baptism. Remember that you are first and foremost God's child. The Lord's Supper is given to us to strengthen our faith. It's for those who are weak in faith, which is all of us. And so you can take Jesus's very body and blood and be strengthened in that way. And then confession and absolution too. A lot of times mental health struggles stem from feelings of guilt, whether perceived or real. And so when you're feeling guilty about sin, even if you know you're forgiven, it can be really helpful to go and confess those sins to your pastor and hear absolution specifically for those sins. That's not to say that counselors and medication are not useful and not helpful and not needed in a lot of cases, but I think that the sacraments are one thing that as Lutherans and Christians and Lutherans, we have the unique opportunity to highlight and use.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bonnie, for like reminding us of that, because I feel like I totally forget that how connected those things are, especially when you're in like that kind of crisis state. It's really hard to remember those sorts of things. And going back to what Kate said about, or the question she asked rather, about how a child might be able to help keep themselves grounded if there's a parent or maybe another family member struggling with their mental health. And I think like a few tips that I've kind of thought of about that is, I mean, like you said, going outside and getting out of any sort of space that's like feeling really negative. If you're able to get out of that space, do it. That's great. And I mean, of course, it can be really hard to leave that person who is struggling with their mental health. But especially if it's a parent or something, and you need to step back, that is not something to feel bad about, especially when you are in that child-parent relationship. And it's always okay to say, hey, I love my mom, I love my dad, whatever it is, but right now what's best for me is that I need to go take a walk, or I need to go into my room, put some headphones on, listen to some good music, that sort of thing. And of course, like everyone has their own coping skills that work the best for them. No two people are alike in that sort of way. But, finding those ways that you can express yourself creatively or do what you love is always going to be a good thing, especially without the expectations of productivity or efficiency. I think that's something that, especially in our American society, we get really caught up in productivity and efficiency. And so remembering that the things that you do to help yourself and that is efficient, helping yourself is productive and is great for you, especially in the long run. So we don't have to keep score of everything as far as grades or making money. The things you do for your own self-care are more than enough to be productive or efficient.
All right. Well, I thank you so much, ladies, for the contribution on this conversation. I want to make sure we get to the next topic. So thanks, Kate, for bringing us that article. But I'm going to pass it on to Bonnie because she has a topic to talk about for what's on the table today as well.
We also want to make sure that kids know or parents know that this might not be a conversation to listen to with little ears around.
That's right. So at this point, if you do have kids, please know that this next section, we're going to be talking about some things that are a little more, not so family friendly. So go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, so what I was going to bring up today is Demi Lovato's latest song called Swine, which likely many of you have heard it or heard parts of it, or at least heard pro-life people responding to it. And basically it's part of a larger album that she put out, and I think she released it June 22nd, 2 days before, right around the anniversary of Dobbs. So very much meant to be a response to that anniversary and to sort of a step in the Y4Life direction. But her song it's extremely profane and vulgar, so we're not going to be reading through the lyrics, but we may make reference to some of the lines as we're talking about it. You guys have all read the lyrics and know what it's about. Essentially, her argument is that if we aren't able to have abortion rights, then women are swine. That's what the right to have an abortion is basically what distinguishes us from animals. And so first, I just wanted to get our general thoughts. What do we kind of make of this argument? And how do we respond to that idea that not being able to abort our children essentially makes us animals?
So coming from a rural community and being around farm animals, I think this is always an interesting argument because anyone who's familiar with farming knows that it's actually okay to kill an animal if it's not going to do well. But as pro-life people, we would rather that a person with a birth defect or who may not be born into the best situation, we would still want that person to be alive. So I think it's a really interesting characterization of pro-life people that, we just want it, or we're just in it for the babies, when in the farming industry, it's not always all about the babies, the baby animals. Sometimes it's about what's most profitable. And if that animal isn't going to be profitable, they don't force it to continue living. Whereas, I think that's in line with the pro-choice argument. And I think it's interesting that there's always that double standard of they don't see their argument as lining up with their beliefs. That was not very well worded, but that's just what always comes to mind.
Yeah, I think what you're touching on there is kind of the irony, right? Yeah. So she says, she indicates that women who are unable to abort their children, unable to have that choice, are being treated as swine. And I think the irony is when we say that a human being is being compared to an animal, I mean, even animals care for their young, right? Now, it's true that there's times when animals also are eaten by their parents in gross but very real instances. But in general, you see mothers caring for their young, right? When you look into the animal world, that's a very natural thing. And so to depict a woman who is, in Demi Lovato's words, or at least implications, forced to care for the child. That's ironic that she would compare that to an animal who by nature cares for his or her, well, her children, right? Especially the female. And then when you do recognize that animals will on occasion, and especially the fathers, eat their children, well, that's kind of, again, ironic too, because in her video, she's got a lot of images of blood and slaughter and really the only slaughtering that's happening is through abortion, right? Which is what she's trying to advocate for. So again, like logically, it just doesn't really make sense. There's a whole lot of other layers we could talk about, but logically, it doesn't even really make sense. So.
Yeah, it's the irony is kind of dumbfounding that's what makes us human, is the ability to kill our own children instead of the ability to use our reason and our senses that we've been given to look past hard circumstances and use this incredibly enormous support system that has been built in this, like in our day, to support women who are in difficult circumstances so that they can bring their children into the world. Like that is the human thing, to have compassion and care and to persevere through something hard, not to sort of give into like base or animalistic kind of instincts for self-preservation. So exactly.
Protect your young from their predators, right? To protect your children from those that would do them harm. That's natural.
Okay, so next I just wanted to ask, in what ways does Demi mischaracterize or lie about Y4Life people and then Y4Life legislation in the lyrics? And I'm happy to kind of touch on that if nobody else wants to go.
Why don't you go ahead and share some of the lyrics that mischaracterize?
The one that stood out to me that she said is one of the lines at the end. She said, "Even if I'm dying, they'll still try to stop me," which is not true at all. There's no pro-life legislation on the books at all that would prevent any life-saving interventions for women, especially when you're talking about like ectopic pregnancies or something like that. She also makes like a reference to our faith. She says, "Picture your faith, imagine your God, and even your holy Bible is suddenly banned. Do you understand?" Now doesn't that sound entitled? It's your book, but it's my survival. So she's saying that abortion is a way in which women survive. And she's also essentially calling abortion her religion, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. And then those first couple lines where she says that she wants to have the ability, I'm not using her words, to have sex with anyone she wants to, right? And that if she were to become pregnant, right, that she couldn't get rid of the child. And I think, even then we have this like mischaracterization of that's actually not what pro-life people want to do, right? They don't want to, they want to support you. But even like, okay, so we all would say sex belongs in marriage, right? But if you look at pro-life people across the board, there's a lot of pro-life groups that don't take a stance on when and where sex is supposed to happen. What many pro-life groups say is, okay, well, if you're going to have sex, protect yourself so that you don't have a child, right? Prevent the creation of a child. Now, again, let's make it very clear. We don't stand there, but it is a mischaracterization of the pro-life movement in general, because the pro-life movement doesn't usually have a stance on when and with whom you're supposed to have sex. So.
And to add to that, what the lyrics that you brought up, Kate, picture your faith, imagine your God, and even your holy Bible is suddenly banned. She's essentially saying this is a religious issue. Only Christians. It's forcing your faith on me to make abortion illegal, and so that again is a mischaracterization. And then obviously we are Christian, to be clear, but by large, like you're saying, Michelle, you don't have to be Christian to be pro-life, because you can make a perfectly sound argument for the the worth and value of human life apart from God or faith. And then the other one I wanted to highlight was just after that line, we got to grow them, we got to raise them, we got to feed them and bathe them. And if you won't, they call you a witch to burn at the stake in Salem. So that right there is just this terrible false dichotomy that if you don't keep your baby, we're going to kill you. Like, which is not happening. We're not burning people at the stake, literally or metaphorically. That's not happening. Those are not the two options. The option that we are gunning for is that women keep their children and we're able to help them do that. Take them to doctor's appointments, bring them supplies, connect them to mental health resources, because we know that is a difficult and taxing transition and that sort of thing. So again, just acting like we are coming at people with pitchforks, which is not what's happening.
Well, and two, even if the mother decides that maybe for her to keep her baby, we want to help find the resources. So like find an adoptive family, help provide monetary resources for both the mother and the child as they enter new lives. We're not advocating for just, leaving the baby on the street either. And, we want both mother and child to be taken care of. And if that mother is in a situation where she cannot care for her child, we want to help find resources and find a family for that baby. And then still supporting her in the end, taking her to follow-up doctor's appointments or follow-up mental health care, things like that, not just forgetting her. And so again, yeah, I think it's a very interesting dichotomy, like you pointed out. Like there's no one forcing you to, I don't know, no one's going to burn you at the stake, like she said, just because you chose to put your child up for adoption or whatever.
And I think the other thing to point out is not only are we committed to providing women with life-affirming resources to be there during their unplanned pregnancies, but the pro-life movement also walks alongside women and men who are healing from the trauma of abortion. So even people that do make that choice, we're not burning them at the stake either. We're there to provide them love and hope and support and the healing that they can find in Christ after making that decision.
Absolutely, Kate. And I think that with that, we can kind of transition into talking a little bit about how we view, through the lens of the gospel and our faith, how we view childbearing and mothering and just parenting. Because I think that's kind of the rub here, is just a completely different understanding of what it means to be pregnant, have a child, be a mom, what that means for how your life changes, what significance there is. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what do we think about childbearing and mothering? What does the Bible say about it?
I was reminded of Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31, where women and mothers who care for their children and care for their houses and things like that are to be praised. And, it talks about in that passage how, she's not idle. And I think that's something that, too, maybe we get mischaracterized for a lot is that we as Christians and life-affirming Christians just want to have a lot of babies, but we don't want to deal with the consequences of that. And that's completely false. I would say that mothers are some of the most self-sacrificing, especially Christian mothers, are some of the most self-sacrificing people you will ever meet. There are mothers who put off showering because the needs of the child come first. There are mothers who work more to have a clean house and to make sure their children are clothed and fed before they worry. It's that very interesting thing of, we don't often think of the mothers and how much they put into it. And I think that's one that really stuck out to me in the last couple days, is that we want moms to be there for their kids and to be there for their spouse, their husband, and to care for the home along with everything else too. So just praising women for those things that they go through every day. And like I said, in a self-sacrificial way.
Biblically speaking, the gift of a child is a gift, right? That marriage is a gift, and it is the hope that of God. It is the intent to bless that marriage with the gift of a child. And so we're even though sin has broken things and prevents that gift in some relationships, and it also makes child rearing more difficult, right? That was part of the consequence of the fall. birthing and rearing. But ultimately, children are always viewed as gifts biblically. And we know that God's word obviously indicates that family is meant to stay together, that family is a gift. But we also know, when we look at the facts, that the best place for a child to be raised, to grow up, is in a home with two biological parents who are married. And of course, our society speaks contrary to that. First of all, it assumes that every person should and will use birth control whether they're married or not, right? To prevent the birth or to prevent the gifts that God intends to give. But in addition to that, we see this tendency toward cohabitation, which again is not life affirming for children. We see a tendency for pushing off the birth of children until much later in marriage. And again, not always the healthiest decision for mother and father, right? For the family as a whole, and limiting family size to what's seen as acceptable societally. So again, I think there's a lot of things in society that don't affirm that childbearing and mothering are gifts, and yet God's word is contrary to that, and that makes us countercultural. But we know that God's word is true, and so we reside there.
I'm so glad that you brought up the fact that a child is best raised in a two-parent household with parents that are married. And I think it's I was just looking at the lyrics again, and the only time that she mentions like a man is for his part in having a baby in the act of sex, and that's it. And she doesn't bring up even like the opportunity or even the idea that a man would be a part of the equation after that first step. And so I think that really, I mean, that concept of marriage would fix a lot of her problems that she's mentioning in the song. And it's hard because also we can see that, I mean, there are very few people who would release a song like this, but this might be going through the heads of a lot of young women who feel like it's completely up to them if they get pregnant, and that they truly feel like they have no support and that they will be doing it all by themselves. And I think that really is the biggest difference here of our stance on this is, I mean, like Kate said, and like all of you have said, that we have all these wonderful resources, and we like the pro-life movement is offering so much support to mothers and to families to help them raise this baby, because I mean, it's not acceptable to have this idea that it's one person, one mother raising a child all by herself. It's not supposed to be like that. And that's where the negative image comes from, is that, that hard work in raising a child by yourself. So I think it's wonderful that you brought that up, Michelle. And it's really, people need a lot of support to realize that that there should be a family structure surrounding raising a child.
Absolutely, Olivia. So a lot of people are on social media and we see this kind of thing all the time. Maybe not as brazen as what Demi Lovato put out, but influencers and celebrities and singers and all these people who are openly pro-choice support all manner of life of causes that we would not agree with as for-life people. And so as Christians and people who are for life, what do we make of a song and an artist like this? Should we listen to her music? I mean, obviously most of her songs are not about abortion. What about other pro-choice celebrities? Can we enjoy their work? How do we navigate that?
So I have some thoughts, and you're welcome to push back. but in general, we are free in the gospel, under the gospel, to make choices, right? But we also recognize that the things that we choose to do, the things we choose to read and to see and to listen to, we are taking into our own bodies, right? We are taking into our own mind, and we have to recognize that those things are going to influence us, right? They are going to have an effect on us. Now, maybe not just the first time we hear it, but again, if we surround ourselves with ideas like this again and again, eventually we're going to be convinced of its rightness, right? And so what I often turn to when I think of things like this, again, to be a gospel motivated voice, we have the freedom in the gospel to listen to a wide variety, and certainly we want to use our mind to respond to it, but also our faith. And I think Philippians 4:8 does a really great job of reminding us of these things. So he says, Paul tells us, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And so, again, we are just inundated in the world with things that are not godly. And so when we have an opportunity to choose things that are godly, that's important. In fact, the Bible commends us to do this so that these things that are holy and good are not only in our thoughts, but also then come out of our mouth, right? That take seed and root in our heart, and really shape the choices that we make and the ways that we interact with others. I think it's important just to recognize that we take a risk. We are putting things into us that are not, that have effects, right? They're not a non-zero. They're a non-zero, or whatever the case, whatever the word I'm trying to think of, but they do have effects on the way we think and the way we act and the way we interact with the world.
Well, and I'm thinking too, just to tie it back to our conversation about mental health earlier, the more that you, and Michelle, you touched on this, but the more that you let those things flood your mind, the more downtrodden and anxious and sad and hopeless you're going to feel, because there is no hope in the pro-choice argument. Like there's no hope there for the future. And it's just a very bleak mindset. So I'm not saying like, don't listen to Demi Lovato. I definitely wouldn't recommend listening to this song. I haven't actually ever, I haven't listened to the song itself because I was so appalled by the fact that she even thought this was okay to put out. But like, I'm not saying you can't ever listen to any Demi Lovato song again. Like, maybe you were a big fan of hers back when you were in like middle school, when she was more of the Disney Channel type person and had clean music. And if you still like listening to that, by all means, like, I'm not going to tell you don't do it. But just keep in mind, too, that the more that you let the little things like this trickle in, and it can cause that hopelessness. And so that's just something to think of, too, is just if you get to that point, turn it off. Like, don't follow that person on social media or take a break from following that person on social media. Just things like that. It's something that I think about from time to time of like, yeah, I like the content that pro-choice celebrity X makes, but it's not uplifting to me all the time, and it's okay to walk away from it if it's not going to be uplifting to you. And I like that. I was also going to bring up the Philippians 4:8 verse, so I like that you did that for me, Michelle, because you spoke to it in a much more concise way than I was going to. So
I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said, Corey. I think also it's important to note that like what you, as a consumer of music and content and whatever, what you choose to listen to also has it has like a vote or like a count. We like, if you listen to this song a few times, you're adding to the number of people who listen to that. And to Demi Lovato, the more listens and the more likes and stuff and follows that she gets, that's saying, that's encouragement to keep making this sort of stuff. And so it's kind of sometimes, thinking like, oh, I'm just one person in millions, like boycotts and like keeping yourself away from music like that and whatever, it does work. Like if enough people genuinely stop listening to celebrities who are so outspoken about abortion and all of these things, and who say crude things like this, and if enough people stop listening to them, it does say something. It's a loud impact there. And then I had one other thing to add, just to what you said about that, like trickling into your brain. I think especially for young people, like for middle schoolers, children, if the more that they listen to these things, the more it's being like they're being desensitized to it, and they already get enough desensitized content on like hanging out with their friends and on the playground at school, whatever. They already hear these things enough. I think if you're a parent and you're able to censor what they're listening to, they don't need more of this kind of content. They're already hearing those sorts of things, or maybe not, but they might already be hearing these sort of things all the time. So I think it's important what we listen to and what we choose to support.
Yeah, and you're also right too, Olivia, that it does make a confession, right? That you talked about numbers that it builds up in favor of Demi Lovato, but it does make a public confession, right? We are not our own. We are also members of the church, members of the body of Christ, and so the things that we do also make a confession to the world. We carry Christ in us, and so people should recognize that we are Christians, and not that Christians are perfect. Christians are not, and they fail all the time. And yet we do make this confession by the grace of God to the world. And so when we can make a good confession by the holy work of the Holy Spirit in our lives, by maybe saying no to certain songs or certain influencers, then to God be the glory, right?
And I would add too that there is a difference between a song like this and then maybe prior to her putting out this song, one of her other songs that's not vulgar and celebrates a different idea. That's something that we can agree with. So I think that you'd be hard pressed to find a movie where all the actors agree with you, or they do make Christian movies and they cast all Christian people, but those are rare. And I think it's important to be able to recognize the truth that non-Christians witness to because of the law being written on their hearts and the fact that they're made in God's image. But we should be able to distinguish between that, where someone's work is actually true, good, and beautiful, essentially by accident, or because they are creatures of God, made in His image, and then being able to say this is no longer true, good, and beautiful. For example, this song is celebrating something. It is celebrating murder. It's incredibly vulgar. It's encouraging women to hate their God-given ability to have children, and to hate their actual children if they're in a situation of unplanned pregnancy. So I think that's just important to be able to distinguish between those and then be discerning. I know as a teenager, like Michelle, I probably would have pushed back on what you said 4 to 6 years ago, because it's just, you want so much to be relevant and to be a part of, to not look like a Christian who has their head in the sand and doesn't know what's going on in the real world, and can't enjoy normal quote unquote stuff. But it's just really important to have integrity and to just say, yeah, I'm not going to listen to that because it's gross and it doesn't tell the truth and it's going to teach me lies. So,
and I think it's super easy to get upset about a song like this and say, oh, well, like the other side is quote unquote winning. But I think we have to take something like this, and it just gives us an incentive to work harder to present a gospel motivated message to the world, and also rest in the knowledge that Christ has already won the victory, and people like Demi Lovato can put out songs like this, and other people are going to come out with things like this and maybe even worse. But we have to just lean on our faith and always return to that.
Yeah.
Amen.
It's a good way to end, right? To remember that God God's already won that victory, that we have the gift, the opportunity to share that message with others, and get to do so in a variety of ways. So thanks, ladies, for joining us today to share that message with our listeners. And thanks to our listeners for joining us. We hope that you join us again next time, that you also share this message with others. So the more that you like and share our podcast, the more people we reach. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for joining the Y4Life team for today's Table Talk for Life. We hope you're better equipped to address today's life issues and uphold the people God has placed in your path. Be sure to check out our programs and resources at y4life.org or email Michelle at y4life.org to find out more about how you can be a gospel-motivated voice for life. And we hope you'll join us next time, right here at Youth for Life Podcasts.